Jabez appears in Scripture as a brief flash of light in a long line of names, a man nearly hidden inside a genealogy where most details are lost to history. Yet from that quiet corner of the Bible comes one of the most profound declarations of faith ever recorded. His life begins under the heavy shadow of sorrow, wrapped in a name that carried the weight of suffering. From the moment he entered the world, he was marked by pain, spoken over with limitation, and set on a path that seemed destined for struggle. But within that beginning, something far greater was unfolding. The God who sees the forgotten was preparing to turn a life labeled by sorrow into a testimony of divine favor, expansion, protection, and transformation. Jabez was named for pain. His mother, overwhelmed by the suffering that accompanied his birth, declared his identity through the name she chose. In ancient culture, names shaped destiny. A name was not a simple title. It was a proclamation, a direction, and often a prophecy about a person's future. To be called Pain was to carry a word that suggested hardship, difficulty, and limitation. It meant living beneath the shadow of an expectation that life would be difficult and that struggle would follow his steps. Yet the man marked by sorrow refused to let that identity define him. Instead, the weight of his name awakened a longing in him, a desire to live beyond what had been spoken over him. Scripture says Jabez was more honorable than his brothers. This honor did not come from birthright or achievement. It came from the posture of his heart. He chose to seek God with a sincerity that set him apart. His honor was shaped through faith, humility, and a refusal to accept that the circumstances of his birth determined the destiny of his life. He carried pain, but he was not ruled by it. He bore a name of sorrow, but he reached for a future shaped by God. Jabez made a decision that would define his legacy. He prayed a prayer so simple, so direct, and so full of bold trust that heaven responded immediately. His prayer contains only a few lines, yet each one carries the weight of deep faith. He first cried, "Oh, that you would bless me indeed." This was not a request born from greed or ambition. It was an invitation for God to pour his goodness upon him. Jabez believed that every true blessing came from the Lord, and he longed for the fullness of God's favor in every part of his life. He desired a life that reflected God's generosity, protection, and provision. Then he asked, "Enlarge my territory." This was more than a plea for land. It was a request for increased capacity, expanded influence, and a life that extended beyond the narrow boundaries created by pain. Jabez believed God had more for him than what circumstance or culture had assigned. He asked to step into purpose, to grow in responsibility, and to walk in a calling larger than his limitations. His third request revealed his humility. "Let your hand be with me." Jabez did not seek expansion without God's presence. He understood that growth requires guidance, strength, and divine covering. The hand of God represented protection, direction, and empowerment. Jabez wanted to walk not in his own strength but under the mighty hand of the Lord. He knew that blessings without God can become burdens, but blessings with God become fruitful and steady. Finally, with raw honesty, he prayed, "Keep me from evil that I may not cause pain." This final cry showed the depth of his desire for transformation. He did not want to repeat the story tied to his name. He longed for freedom from the patterns of suffering that had followed him since birth. He refused to let pain define his legacy. Instead, he asked God to make him a source of blessing, peace, and goodness, to break every cycle that threatened to continue through him. Then comes one of the most powerful statements in the entire genealogy, "And God granted what he requested." Heaven responded instantly. The prayer of a man marked by sorrow reached the throne of God, and God rewrote his story. What had been spoken over Jabez at birth was overturned by the one with final authority. God transformed the man named Pain into a man defined by divine favor, expansion, and honor. Though Scripture reveals nothing else about his life, the fact that his prayer is preserved speaks volumes. It survived generations because God wanted every believer to know what faith, courage, and a sincere heart can unleash. Jabez teaches that pain does not determine destiny. What others speak over you does not define what God can do through you. His story declares that you can be born in hardship yet rise into blessing. You can come from brokenness yet step into expansion. You can inherit sorrow yet choose faith. God is not limited by your name, your past, your family, or your circumstances. He hears the cries of those who dare to ask boldly. The prayer of Jabez has inspired countless believers because it demonstrates the simplicity and power of faith. It shows that asking God for blessing is not selfish. It is an acknowledgement of His generosity. It reveals that expansion is not arrogance. It is surrender to a greater purpose. It teaches that seeking God's hand is not weakness. It is wisdom. And pleading for protection is not fear. It is recognition that we are shaped by the one who guards our steps. His story reminds us that honor begins internally, not through recognition but through a heart that humbly seeks God. Blessing is invited through faith. Territory grows through obedience. Protection surrounds those who walk with God. Transformation begins with a cry that rises from deep within the soul. For all who feel defined by their beginnings, Jabez offers hope. To those burdened by family history, he declares that God rewrites lineage. To the limited, he announces that God enlarges territory. To the broken, he whispers that God heals. To those afraid of repeating cycles of pain, he promises that God can break them. His life, though recorded in only a few lines, becomes a canvas of divine redemption. It shows that God does not overlook the hidden, the hurting, or the unnoticed. He sees those tucked inside genealogies and hears the prayers of those born in hardship. The God who answered Jabez is the same God who listens today. Jabez's prayer is not a magical formula but a model of a heart fully trusting in God's goodness. It stands as evidence that heaven moves when faith speaks. His legacy invites us to believe that God delights in blessing His children, expanding their purpose, guiding their steps and protecting their journey. The man born in pain became the man marked by blessing, and his prayer continues to echo across generations, calling every believer to rise above labels, limitations, and sorrow. His story is more than a prayer. It is a declaration that what begins in pain can end in divine purpose when surrendered into God's hands.